open up for questions. You can get involved as well. So let me get through some questions and we'll turn it over to you in a little bit. I went to the J School here, and the Venerable Paul Atkins told us about the inverted pyramid, and that is when you're writing a story, turn the pyramid upside down because the biggest part should be on top, which means don't bury the lead. So we're going to start with this. Chris, you were part of the team at Fox that called Arizona for Joe Biden, and apparently that got you fired. Is that correct, and why did Fox fire you?
Well,
way to go, Hoppy.
maybe thanks for easing into it. So much for the home field advantage. First of all, you have been hiding the fact that you were an honors graduate in journalism, and now I feel like I'm really in trouble up here with you because this could be problematic. And now I know who's watching the stream. This is why that's why I put a clean shirt on when I'm going to do talk about, because now I know it's because of you. That's why. I don't know. Fox has said a couple of things about why I got fired, and I don't really care. They don't owe me a job, and I can also understand why having me on was not in their financial best interest. I can see why a business decision would point to the direction that I would not be a worthwhile asset, because I don't know whether you know this, but some Republicans were very upset about losing the election in 2020. There were some Republicans who did not like that. And
they took it out on you. Did some take it out on you?
Well, look, your listeners text you. You read their texts, which speaks well of you, and it speaks well of him. America is. I don't want to receive America's text updates. Right in the week following the 2020 election. I would not want to have been like, I wonder what the folks out there are just thinking today. Look, if you believe this is a problem with siloed media. If you're only receiving one flow of information, right? If there's only one voice that you're hearing consistently, when something shows up and disagrees with that, it doesn't feel like something you disagree with. It feels like an attack, right? I didn't care, honestly, who won the 2020 election. Vote for whoever you want to. Shoot the lights out. My job is to try to be the weatherman and tell you which way the wind is going to blow, not who should win. My joke is, I am here to tell you which direction the hurricane is going. I'm not rooting for the storm, but I do want you to know which trailer park it is likely to hit. And I take that work seriously. And I always have, and I have from the days that I was learning to emulate the great Bob Kelly, my mentor, first at the Intelligencer and then at the Daily Mail, who had also been the political editor at the Daily Mail. The great Richard Grimes. It's always wheeling, guys, getting it done. That's all I'll say. The great Richard Grimes, also of Wheeling, who was a political editor at the Charleston Daily Mail. And there was an energy and an attitude, the same that they showed, the same that you show, that I've tried to bring to my career. So when Fox fired me, it was not a super day, but I was never mad about it because this is a weird business and stuff changes. I mean, when I was 28 years old, I thought that I had the job that I would keep for the rest of my life. I became the politics editor at the Charleston Daily Mail. I had an office that the door closed on. I was the youngest ever, probably, editor of the Daily Mail, politics editor of the Daily Mail. I had a column, the red carpet lounge between the Capitol, the red carpet lounge. Red carpet lounge was in between the newspaper and the Capitol. Life was good, baby, right? except for the first month when you had to pay. But I thought that I was like there, and then the newspaper business exploded right under my, the earth gave way right under my feet. And it was not long after I got to be political editor there and writing on the front page and writing my column that I got called into a meeting that said, so this is about to fall apart. And it was very nice that this is about to fall apart, and if I was you, I'd run for it. And so I did. I've been running ever since. And This is a business that you cannot be in if you're not prepared for some vicissitudes, and that's okay.
So like riding a motorcycle, those who have been down and those who are going down. So
Yeah,
the media
that's
business,
right.
those who've been fired, those are going to be fired.
Those are going to be fired.
Right.
The rain and the weather in Scotland is only one of two things: raining or about to rain.
About to rain.
That's right.
In your book, and I did want to start and kind of get you going on that Fox thing, but let me talk about some elements of the book that really stood out. In your introduction, you identify a lot of what goes on in the media, talk radio, and cable news as performative outrage. Performative outrage. And I thought that was a real significant identification of what you say is going on in the media. So define that and tell us about it.
If you're upset about what a stranger did, somebody that you don't know, and you go on Twitter and say how upset you are about what this stranger did, are you going to get more action on that tweet if you say, upon reading Mr. Kercheval's commentary, I have some concerns about his stance on this, respectfully yours. Or if you say, Hoppy Kercheval is the dumbest, I hate that guy, blah, 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 he hates America. Which one of those is going to generate more action? Which one is going to generate more heat? So there is a reward structure implicit in an atomized media space where, well, let me put it like this.
Well, give examples.
Yeah, so here's how it works. When I was writing in the newspaper business, so I started in 1993 as a 17-year-old sports writer. But when I started full-time in 1997 and 1998, we didn't know what people thought about the articles. We didn't know whether they liked the article or didn't like the article. What we knew was that we were writing stuff to go around mulch ads and to go behind the Respecs insert. That's what we knew. And in terms of, you might get a couple letters to the editor, you might get a little something else, but basically you were knocking on the wall. Who's out there? Did you hear this? Are you interested in this? Is this important to you? Did you like it? And we weren't sure. So we sort of had to go do it ourselves. What we have now that's different, aside from the fact that you can go to a million different outlets to hear exactly the opinion that matches up with yours, not just right and left, but within right and left, narrower and narrower and narrower to be exactly this way. So you could find somebody who is, well, I'm right wing, but I'm more like this, but I'm actually more like that. But then I'm more of a nationalist than a whatever. I'm a Catholic integralist. Oh, good. Here are the 5 outlets that you should be reading to constantly flatter you and tell you how smart you are. So now we know what's clicking. We know what people are responding to. So what is our temptation as a journalist to do? Give them more what they want, right? They like this, guess what? And I talk about in the introduction of the book, in the Washington Post newsroom, they have a leaderboard up that tells the people sitting in the room every day, what's clicking, baby? What do the people like? What do they want? Well, guess what they want? Crap, right? They want, I use the example on the day of the fall of Kabul, which was the biggest foreign policy story in, I don't know, since the Iraq invasion, maybe. A huge, massive story. And the Washington Post had amazing reporters on the ground in Afghanistan, reporting from the war zone, doing this work. What was number 1 on the site that day? A shoddy story knitted together from press releases and tweets about a bishop, archbishop, Roman Catholic archbishop, who had been critical of the vaccine, that he had been stricken with COVID and was on a respirator. And let me promise you, the tone of the article was not sorrowful. They were not sorry that he was sick. They were thrilled. And the commenters underneath were just ecstatic about this. And yeah, that's what you get. And just the vomit from underneath that. That was more popular than the coverage of the fall of Kabul, because it affirmed the biases, it affirmed the feelings of Washington Post subscribers who wanted to feel better than that guy. And his sickness validated and vindicated their worldview. So they clicked on that. And if you're a reporter if you're a reporter working for the Washington Post, and there's a lot of good reporters working for the Washington Post, or any outlet, I'm not trying to pick on the Post, and any outlet, if you know what the people want, it's going to be really tempting to give it to them. And it's true that they may not always want what meets the standards for being an American journalist.
And we'll get to that. And that creates what you write about in the book, what you call this feedback loop of outrage that starts going and keeps going. So tell us about that.
Okay, so so let's see. We'll say Nancy Pelosi says X, and Kevin McCarthy says, "How dare she say X? That is an outrageous thing to say. I can't believe she said it." And then somebody gets to take then Dick Durbin can take umbrage at what Kevin McCarthy said, and then Donald Trump can take umbrage at what Dick Durbin said, and then Joe Biden can take umbrage and take umbrage and take umbrage. And you have these bank shots that keep propelling stupid stories in which nothing happened. And one of the things we talk about in the book is if you see a story where nothing is happening, but we're just talking about people's feelings, you are probably in a bad neighborhood. You are probably not in the right kind of story. If you ever see a story, you click on it, it's like, Twitter explodes over, dumb guy said dumb thing, then other dumb people said other dumb stuff, and tweet and retweet, and you're like, so in the old days, in Wheeling, you had to get Valley Viewpoints. You had to go walk out on the street and talk to real people. Moondog was not allowed to be in after a while, but you had to go talk to real human beings on the street, at least to get a man on the street point of view. All reporters have to do now is open up their phone, and there's just a river of outrage flowing through there, and they can take the hottest takes that they want and then repurpose it into a fake article.
And this outrage that is out there, and you talk about the Washington Post story, but it's in cable news, it's in talk radio, it permeates, you suggest, not all media, but it permeates media at a lot of different levels, and outrage creates an emotional response. And that's critical to the loop that you're talking about, and critical to get people to click and stay with it and be outraged and upset and have an emotional response to what they're hearing or what they're reading.
The media scholar Andrei Miroshnichenko, who thank God allows himself to be called Andrei Mir, but Andrei Mir coined the term post-journalism. And in journalism, when you were an honors graduate here, we had information. We profited or made our livings by giving information to people who couldn't get it and didn't have it, right? So you had to come to us to get the info. And it was a pretty good business model. We had the information that you needed, and you would either subscribe or watch the ads or be present to get that, and that was the bargain. Now you don't need us to get the info, right? It's everywhere. You're swimming in information. You can't avoid the news, basically, right? I went to the gas station the other day. It was a Shell station, and I put my card in, and a little television just started up right there, and it was just dumb news, just right there. Like, hey, you've got 30 seconds. Have you thought about, have you thought about buying the cheesy gordita Crunchwrap? And by the way, did you hear what J-Lo did? And it's impossible now almost to escape it. So we have all of the information that we want. So what happened was the polarity got switched on the machine. Instead of us having information that we are giving to people, people have feelings. Lord, do they have feelings. And they have feelings, and what we can give them is we can match their outrage. We can match their feeling. We can validate them. Because if you think about it this way, in 1973, something like 2/3 of American households watched one of the three major network newscasts, right? And nobody said, I consider myself to be a Cronkite Democrat or no, it wasn't that. It was the news, right? And Republicans thought it was biased, and it probably was. But it was not, your identity was not tied up in whether you were watching Huntley and Brinkley or whomever. Now, your identity is closely connected. If you're an active citizen, people will ask, if you were to say to somebody, what news do you watch or read? As soon as they start answering, you're like, oh, I see. One of those, eh? You're one of those guys, eh? And right, so if somebody says, oh, well, I read the New York Times. We know how they are. Okay, that's fine. And in the book, one of the things I really enjoyed was there's a social psychologist named Lee Ross, and he did a lot of great work. one of actually the most useful hostile media effect. And if there's any journalism school students here, you maybe have already studied hostile media effect. But hostile media effect is the first and best example. They took a group of Stanford students and they asked them whether they were supportive of Israel or the Arabs in a conflict around the Lebanese civil war, where there had been a massacre and air forces were blaming the Israelis. The Israelis said it wasn't their fault, and it was a very contentious issue. And they asked a group of students, which side do you think is right here? So then they sorted all of the pro-Israel and all of the pro-Arab students into their own classrooms. And then you know what they did? They showed them the exact same news report. And then they asked them about it. And guess what they both said?
Yeah.
Horribly biased against my side. Both sides said that it was horribly biased against their side, and that whoever put that report together was clearly rooting for the other side and would have excused bad actions by blank and blah, 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 blah. And we're sure of it. And hostile media effect is, I am primed to see the bias against me. Whereas the bias that runs in my favor, I'm like, well, that's just right. You know, that's just correct, duh, right? As I tell people, if you ask me to write about the coming college football season, I'm going to tell you, well, 0-2 is not an ideal start. In the long run, what you see will happen is that WVU will do all of this stuff. And Mountaineer fans will be like, yeah, that sounds about right. I think this guy's on the level. Whereas a Pitt fan is probably going to have a different experience. So that's hostile media effect. But the Lee Ross piece that really moved me was what they call fundamental attribution error. And fundamental attribution error defines the means by which, if my guy does it, it's okay and it's understandable. But if the other guy does it, then this is a catastrophe. And I go through several news stories that were Obama does X and Democrats excuse it, and Trump and Republicans go insane. Trump does the same thing, and Democrats who had excused it before lose their minds over it, and Republicans who had gone crazy when Obama did something similar. So the fundamental attribution error is when someone who is from my tribe does the wrong thing, my brain immediately explains why it's okay for them to do it, and I'm sure there was a good reason. If the car that cuts me off in traffic has a Mountaineer sticker on the back of it, like, well, he must be on his way to something really important if he's doing that. I don't know, must be a big deal. If the guy has a pit bumper sticker, what do I say? You know that's how these guys are. That's the worst. He's probably just doing it for kicks.
You're sort of an equal opportunity critic of media and also of media consumers, not just producers but consumers. And you tell a personal story about your dad, that later in life your dad became, and I'll let you tell the story, consumed by a particular news outlet, and while you and your dad had this great relationship, his preoccupation with a particular news outlet became an issue.
Well, my sister Jenny and my niece Katie are back there, and they can remember the era of the two televisions. My father had a monitor as big as those in the back that was usually on Fox News, and I was usually on Fox News. And he was not able to watch both Fox News and Fox Business at the same time, so he got a second television that he put underneath it. You could have cooked a hot dog like a microwave if you had just sat in that room with him. And my father and I were very, very close until the end, and he was my dearest friend. But it was true that in 2012, when I had a front row seat to an awesome political election, I was sort of like, that was the first presidential that I had gotten to cover as a real national, as a national. I will punch myself in the face for saying this, but as a national figure. And so I'm like talking, exactly. I'm like talking to the campaigns. I'm like doing all this stuff. And I want to share it with my dad. But the mention of Barack Obama's name had turned into like volcanic upset, and he just couldn't talk about it. And I realized, look, I don't know, everybody in this room has a different amount of news and information that they should consume in the course of a day. You and I are weird for many reasons, but one of them is our work requires hours of news consumption every day. April still has to do it in her capacity. Hours of news consumption. The Wheeling crew has to do every day to be in this business. You have to consume hours of news. Most people probably shouldn't consume hours of news every day. And as I like to joke, I don't know what the right increment of news consumption is, but 24 hours is probably not the correct increment. And if you have 2 monitors, that's 48 hours. You're really doubling down. News is, and you know this, I want it to be entertaining. I want it to be fun. I want it to be interesting. That's why I make jokes. That's why I do things the way that I do them, is because I don't think that the news always has to be the news. I don't think it always has to be the news. But I know that I guess the simplest way I can put it is, if I know that what I'm doing is bad for my country, I can't do it, right? Now, if my neighbor, well, I don't want to head off your question because I think you are going to want me to talk about what human beings can do. But I just put it this way: my experience with my dad told me that news saturation at those kinds of levels is probably not a good thing, because we are incredibly blessed as a country. We are doing incredibly well as a species. We're really amazing. But if I consume news 24 hours a day, what does news tell me? Bad, trouble, look out, more trouble ahead. Yes, more trouble ahead. What was the joke about the New York Times headline on the last day? World ends, women, minorities hardest hit.
Yeah.
The apocalyptic bent in the news, where both sides tell me that I live in a country that is at the brink, right, at the edge. But I go around as I'm on this book tour and traveling around the country. What do I find? It's a great country. We're doing great. Like, we got our problems. I'm not saying we don't, but I wouldn't trade our lot in this world with anybody else. But if you sit in news that, in order to meet its profit demands, has to keep you freaked out and upset all the time, you will eventually be freaked out and upset, and you will not be able to talk about this stuff. Like, I'll shut up right after I say this. The advantage of living in a republic is that we don't have to think about news and politics all the time. We have to vote every 2 years. We should go vote every 2 years. We should stay informed. We should be read in. But we should then go live our lives, right? I'm a sometimes food. I'm not an all-the-time food. You should stop by and get a little Chris Stirewalt and have a little hoppy in your day, and have a little bit, but it doesn't need to be your vocation. Norm Macdonald's joke was, when I was a kid, the news was only half of the hour, and it wasn't even the whole half of the hour, because at the end they always had a story about an elk in a sporting goods store.
In your book, Chris, you make a number of references to Donald Trump, and you're unsparing in your criticism of him, as you are many in the book. But you also point out this. Let me read the quote. Outlets left and right initially loved Trump because while he was bad at politics, he knew how to make compelling television.
Dude was a producer. I watched him on a feed one time reset a camera shot because he knew where the camera was set up was, no, you got to move. And he was right? The director who was on scene to do the interview, Trump, who produced his own reality show for a long time, and it was immediately like, the guy knows television, right? He is a creation of television. And the people, currently, there are some Democrats who funded the campaigns or funded efforts to get Republicans who don't want to accept the results of the 2020 election and who are still there, to get them nominated. So in Pennsylvania and in other places, Democrats spent more money than the Republican candidate because they wanted to try to pick their winner. That doesn't strike me as a very patriotic thing to do. That doesn't strike me, and I'm not saying that they're not patriotic, but that's pretty deeply cynical. And I quote in the book Les Moonves, who was the head of Viacom CBS. And when Donald Trump was like, the orange comet is starting to burn across the sky and the world is watching, and oh my gosh, can you believe this? Moonves went to talk to investors, and he talked about, may be bad for the country, but it's great for CBS. I say, keep going, Donald. And it's like, how can you say that? Right? If you really think it's bad, if you think that what's going on is bad for your country, don't laugh it off and then talk about how that's good for the shareholders. You're already rich, Les Moonves, right? You're already, Julie Chen wouldn't have married you otherwise. Like, what do you like? Come on, bro. Do better.
You say that in politics, too, it's gotten to the point where too many elected representatives see themselves as celebrities as opposed to representatives.
Mm-hmm.
Examples, and how do you mean?
Matt Gaetz. Here's my favorite one. A market research firm took 35 or so members of Congress, and they did, over a lengthy period of time, tracked Twitter and social media engagement on articles about these members of Congress and Joe Biden. And they then at the end ranked who had the stickiest, most interacted with items. Who was at the top of the list? Guess who was at the top of the list? Yeah, who do you think? Who in this? Guess who was at the top? Who had the most social media interaction? AOC. There's one of the top 5. Marjorie Taylor Greene, Ted Cruz, Matt Gaetz. All of the anchovies, right, are there at the top. And who's at the bottom of the list? Whoa. Too soon. Is Joe Biden, Mitch McConnell, Chuck Schumer, Kristen Sinema, and Joe Manchin, who at the time when this came out were the most important people in American politics for that period of time as they were negotiating all of those things and doing that stuff. The people who were generated the most traffic couldn't get a post office named. They couldn't do nothing in Congress. But what they can be is controversial. And by the way, 90% of the traffic around those stories, this was negative coverage, right? So where's the AOC traffic coming from? Right side outlets. Where's the Ted Cruz traffic coming from? Left side outlets. Because what they want to do is say, don't you hate this person? Oh, I do hate that person. That's a good point. I hadn't thought about how much I hated him today. That is a great point. Thank you for putting that in front of me. And the perverse incentive structure is that it's good for them to be hated. It's good for those members of Congress to be hated because it makes them more famous. It raises more money for them, and so they can go be trolls. And that's what they want to do and not legislate.
And it raises their credibility with their people, right?
You got
the more that they're hated by them, the better they are with.
If you want to be an effective lawmaker, you cannot be a celebrity lawmaker. It's not possible. Though Manchin is finding some interesting spaces. He is finding some interesting spaces around that. But generally speaking, the real work gets done behind closed doors. It doesn't happen out
in front of the camera. Yeah.
That's right.
We're going to open up for questions in a minute, so start thinking about your questions. I've got a few more for Chris, and then we'll go to your questions. Tell the Mr. B potato chip story.
I had to tell that one on myself. And by the way, is Mr. B still going?
Are they? Yeah, I think they've been sold, or are they still?
And I don't know who. And I don't know who owns Mr. B now, or if there has been a change in ownership. So please, this is not in any way intended to be defamatory. But
with all due respect.
With all due respect, comma. But there had been a big news story surrounding Mr. B potato chips. I was a young reporter. I was probably, I don't know whether I was a general assignment reporter then, whether I was covering federal courts, state and federal courts in Charleston, or whatever I was doing. And there was this news coverage on Mr. B potato chips. And I said, you know what we ought to do? We ought to have a potato chip tasting and make recommendations. A fun story, like a lifestyle section story. So I say, we'll do that, and we'll have Mr. B's, and we'll have Utz, we'll have Ruffles, we'll have whatever. We'll taste them, and then we'll get the food writer in on it. We'll all taste the chips, and it'll be cute, and ha ha ha. And plus, I'll get to eat potato chips at work. So we had the chips, and the Mr. B chips were, as I said in the book, Mr. F. They were not. They were not the favorite. And so we wrote it up, and I put it in the newspaper, and moved on with my life. What I subsequently found out was that the Mr. of Mr. B was not happy with our coverage of his potato chips, and he was outraged and so mad, and he was particularly mad because he had given George Homan, who was then the business editor at the Daily Mail, access, and he had been friendly to us, and why are we denigrating his potato chips? And I'm like, journalism, man, like journalism. This is like important stuff. It would be many years later before I realized that he was right. Him and his employees and his family doing their work, trying to run a potato chip company in Parkersburg, West Virginia. And I, a jerk, was like, oh, let's just flippantly, let's do, this would be seagull journalism.
Just fly over.
Fly in, defecate all over everything, fly away. Our opinion about his potato chips didn't really matter, and it really wasn't a good use of my time, wasn't really a good use of the Daily Mail's platform, because it was kind of punching down a little bit. And what the lesson I learned over time was, I have a First Amendment right to say whatever I want, but I have a First Amendment responsibility to use that for constructive purposes. A lot of stuff is fluff, right? I won't say most, maybe most news. There's a lot of fluff in it, right? And my call in the book is choose virtuous fluff. There will always be some fluff, but don't be cruel, don't be cheap, don't be mean, be thoughtful, and remember that there are real human beings attached to those potato chips.
What's the fix? Because the book is how we fix it. So what's the fix?
There is no American journalism without Americanism. Whatever you do in your life, if you're a student, if you're an American student, if you're an American groundskeeper, if you're an American football coach, if you're an American whatever, the work that you do cannot be dissonant to the American project, right? You can't do work that you know is bad for the Republic, because that's what we owe. We owe special obligations because we enjoy these extravagant freedoms to do our work. And I want to tell you, there was a reporter in Texas 10 days ago who was stabbed to death by a county official.
Las Vegas.
It was Las Vegas, sorry. I just always assume it's Texas.
Texas or Florida. Texas or Florida, but it happened to be in Las Vegas.
But stabbed to death, this reporter, for doing his job. That is shocking and rare in the United States. In most of the world, it's not rare, right? To be a reporter, to tell the truth, to go report on people in positions of power is dangerous and scary. And it's not here. And so we enjoy these great privileges. And so we have a special obligation. And we have a special obligation, by the way, to the million men and women who died in defense of the Constitution and in defense of this republic, that I can't make a living doing something that I know hurts the country, right? I can't say, I'm going to shortcut this and do this crappy thing to try to get a few more clicks to try to get there. And by the way, I should point out, I am sure that I have failed almost every standard. In my career at some point, I am sure that I have failed almost every one of these things that I have said. I am sure that I have not, I have come up short in all of this stuff. But I know that I can't knowingly engage something that's bad for the country. We all as citizens, though, have special obligations to one another and to the Republic, which is this. I don't care if you want to go to, what's still open for a good hot dog around here? What's the correct hot dog?
Jeans is still
open.
open.
Okay, Jeans is still around? Okay, good. Because Yans is gone, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, Yans is open.
Yans is still open? Okay, Yans. Okay, we'll go with Yans. Okay, I don't care if you go to Yans every day and get 4 hot dogs every day of your, as long as I don't have to ride in the car with you. And you go get 4 Yans every day, and onion rings and a milkshake every day for lunch. Your doctor's going to probably want to talk to you about some of your choices, but I say shoot the lights out. I do care if you're not eating a responsible diet in your news media consumption, because how you are as a citizen is substantially shaped by how you're getting your information. If we love America, then we have to love Americans. That's the hard part, right? The easy part is say, I love America, that's great. Well, you know what America's full of? Hang on, Americans. We are annoying, and we are really difficult. But if I love America, I have to love Americans. And if I have that filial love for my fellow Americans, then I owe it to them to be reasonably well informed before I participate in public life. Even if that's just to vote, even if that's just to say something stupid on Twitter, I have to read from a variety of sources. I have to make sure, and this is the number one thing for news consumers. If you always like what you read and you always agree with what you read and see, you're not doing it right. You're not doing it right because you should be challenged. Your thinking should be challenged. If you are left, you should be reading. If you're left wing, you should figure out the voices on the right that you think that are credible and go check it out, right? Go see what George Will had to say and listen, right? Find those credible voices on the right that you say, okay. And if you're on the right, you got to find the people of goodwill on the left that you say, okay, I think you're a Tommy, but go ahead. And it doesn't mean that you have to agree with those voices, and it doesn't mean that you have to agree with those outlets, but we can't live in, right now what we're doing, some people will say it's a civil war. I think the better term is it's a national divorce. We have rejected each other so much and moved into this separate space where people are living in their own curated realities on either side, so that when we get to these moments, the saddest thing about January 6th, the people who were doing that thought they were doing a patriotic thing, right? They were so far removed from what was really going on in the world that they really thought that what they were doing was that the Chinese puppet government has installed a puppet in the presidency, and the ballots are being smuggled on Zodiac boats or whatever. If you thought that was true, then you'd be doing the right thing. So the tragedy is this national divorce where these two sides hold each other in contempt. We have to do better than that, and the way we do better than that is to make ourselves a little uncomfortable as we go in our news consumption.
Let's open up for questions for Chris, and before we do that, let's give a round of applause. So questions for Chris, you want to come up to the mic? Sir, please. Oh, April, you want to handle this? Okay, go ahead, sir.
Okay, there we go.
He's going to freestyle now.
No. I'm actually a radio host of Bipolar Radio, and my name is Dj Gwk. I have two things, one a question, one more a statement. I'll make the statement first. I wanted to comment on your January 6th thing and maybe have your opinion on that, but then I'll go into my question. I feel like things that happened there, like the destruction of property and everything, was also the problem. If the thing is, we pay taxes, we do everything for the government to take care of us or be ran properly. When the government shows that they can't perform their job, we have the right in the Constitution to take back said government. So the occupying of the building or going to peaceful protest was a proper action, but the destruction of property or theft or killings is when it turned into a problem.
Yes.
He agrees.
I appreciate that. Now, the question I do have, because everything has a cause and effect, so the butterfly effect of Margalo being raided and the FBI finding files and everything, how do you think that that's going to affect the election coming up with Trump? Because, like you said, everything either turns toxic or turns positive. So how do you think the butterfly effect is going to affect that situation?
Thank you for your question. The way American politics works today is you don't want to be the story, you want your opponent to be the story, because we have two intensely unpopular parties that people are grossly dissatisfied with. Have I ever told you my theory about how the Access Hollywood tape made Donald Trump president?
No, go.
Okay. So Hillary Clinton never could get over 50%. She's like Donald Trump is like in a Twitter war with the Gold Star family, and Hillary Clinton's like 46. Like, seems like. And then Trump is calling the former Miss Universe pageant Miss Piggy and fighting, and Hillary Clinton's like 45. And I'm like, it seems like you should be doing better. I don't know. But anyway, so the problem for Donald Trump, as usual, is that he cannot stop talking. It is not within him ever. Even when it's the correct time to shut up, he cannot do it. So Trump keeps dominating the news all cycle. And then the Access Hollywood tape hits. The chairman of the Republican National Committee, all these people are like, you're going to have to drop out. You're going to have to save the Senate, see if we can put Mike Pence as the nominee to try to get through. Oh my gosh, what a catastrophe. But it was turned out to be the best thing that happened to Trump, because he finally got scared enough to shut up for a little while. He would, like the children of Israel, only after he had wandered in the desert long enough and he had gone down to like 33%, he became willing to tear down the golden calf, and he went to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. He gave what I call the Gettysburg Redress of Grievances. He started out and explained why these women were too unattractive to sexually harass, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then he looks up at the teleprompter, and I will always remember the moment, and he started reading. And you know what he said? Cut your taxes, conservative judges, strong defense. Republican, like straight Republican talking points. And he was scared enough to stay calm for a while. And then James Comey, wow, that guy. So James Comey, right at that moment, is like, well, Hillary's going to win. So we don't want to get in trouble with the Republicans after Hillary wins. So we're just going to splash Anthony Weiner's laptop, which is a series of words so disgusting that when you think about it, your skin crawls. Anthony Weiner's laptop, noted sex offender Anthony Weiner's laptop, and James Comey just like 5 days before the election just sails that sucker right out into the national discussion, which took Hillary Clinton from where she wanted to be, which was like, have you heard about Donald Trump? I hear this guy's pretty bad, and puts her right into the headlines, right at the center of the story. And the way that the American persuadable voters did throughout 2016 was like, there's no way I could vote for Donald Trump. Oh gosh, maybe I could vote for Donald Trump. Oh, Hillary, I actually can't vote for him. Oh God, no, I can't do that either. So as they're flipping back and forth, the persuadable voters throughout the closing days, the news cycle popped in such a way that Trump had been quiet and defensive and message disciplined for the first time at exactly the moment that James Comey, trying to cover his own very tall posterior, decided to do that. So I think the butterfly effect around Mar-a-Lago was first beneficial for Democrats because it put Trump... midterm elections are supposed to be a referendum on the party in power and the president in power, which is what was shaping up. The Mar-a-Lago raid, or whatever term anybody prefers to use for it, the visit, that put Trump back front and center, which was good for Democrats. But then Joe Biden was like, hold my beer. I'm going to go to Philadelphia, and I'm going to give the speech, and I'm going to take attention back for myself, which was probably not the correct move politically.
Questions? While you're thinking about it, yes, sir. Come on up. All right, come on up. That's all right. Get in line. Get in line.
What I was going to say was my biggest criticism of journalism these days is more in the print media.
What's
media. That? I know. What is that? Like the newspaper in Morgantown doesn't even publish every day of the week anymore. But it's the way they write stories. They're not like what we were taught as journalism. I'm almost 60 years old. When we were taught journalism was who, what, when, where, how, and the most important things at the top. Like you said, don't bury the lead. But now it's like it's story time. They want to like tell a novelize the news story, and that's not real journalism to me. And the other thing is that back in the 90s, I was politically active helping a candidate, and we had the Republican headquarters in Morgantown, and some young journalism students came down to do a story, and they're young, college kids, and I asked the girl, I was like, so how come you're, because I'm a curious, inquisitive person, and I asked her, like, why do you want to be a journalism student? And she said that I want to make a difference in the world. And to me, that was like not what journalism's about. Journalism to me is like reporting the news, being the guy the caricature of the guy with the press thing in his hat and the microphone and all that, and trying to be an investigative journalist. And I just think almost journalism is almost dead in the respect of like you said, it's become so polarized between left and right, or conservative, liberal, or whatever. So I just feel like basically the point I'm trying to make is I think journalism is not true journalism anymore.
When I thought I had a pessimistic view, the most important thing when I talk to journalism students, I remind them that this is a vocation and not a profession. Vocation from the Latin voce, to be called to. This is something that you have to be called to. You have to want to do this. From the first day that I walked into the Wheeling Intelligencer when I was 17 years old, I was in love. I had found my people. I had found my fellow ink-stained wretches. I knew that this was like what was up. And then the best education I got was what? Writing a bajillion stories, right? Writing 5 stories a day. Given the opportunity to crank out these stories, like bang, bang, pounding it, just as I'm sure you had to do when you were starting out. We have a problem, which is that because of our hand computers, everybody's national media, right? Why spend your time calling back to Margaret Belts with the reports of who got pulled over outside of the Hardee's on National Road the night before from the police station, if I can just go start expressing my feelings and opinions about what's going on in the world? The years that I spent and you spent and you spent and you spent doing so there's lots of different kinds of journalism. Opinion journalism is journalism, and I like an anecdotal lead personally when I can get away with one. But doing the who, what, when, where, and how.
The shoe leather.
Yeah, the shoe leather. And by the way, what we call commodity news. Commodity news is really important, and learning how to do that is really important before you go on to the next thing. So for journalism students, all of the lofty aspirational stuff is great, and all of those things are great, but the most important thing that you can do is find somebody who will pay you to do it, and then go do a bunch of it. And you will know whether or not you were meant to be a journalist, because after 2 years, if you still like it, then you have survived. And you're like, okay, now I can actually do this.
Okay, so besides an Ogden newspaper, what do you recommend getting this healthy dose of journalism from? Where it's not like a chili dog and onion rings.
Well, sometimes you need a chili dog and onion rings. I'm going to donate my body to science fiction, so I'm not I'm not entirely. I'm not saying there's no room for a little junk food in your diet. I want to take this opportunity, as I do in the book, to talk about my friend Hoppy a little bit. West Virginia's politics would be very different if it was not for my friend sitting right here.
Absolutely.
West Virginia is blessed to have a person who, if you are running for office, you have to talk to Hoppy, right? In the national media, politicians have figured it out. Blow off the press. You don't need to talk to the press. Go straight over their heads. Do whatever. West Virginia is lucky that when the time comes, who's going to moderate the debate? Well, it's going to have to be Hoppy. It's going to have to be the dean. Is going to have to be called in. And the reason that is true is that whatever my friend thinks and whatever his opinion may be, he strives to be fair, and he strives to not take cheap shots, and he strives, when he wakes up in the morning, he knows that there are a few paths on the road in front of him, right? And there's one that will make more of his listeners enthusiastic, and there's one that will make them really unhappy. And he chooses what will be good radio and will be an entertaining show and will be whatever else. But he's never going to lie. He's never going to say something he doesn't believe. And he's never going to take a cheap shot to get through the next hour, to get to the next commercial break. And local news. Here's what happened. I'll give you the nutshell. 2005, print advertising revenue in the United States hits its zenith of all time, and baby, it was huge. It was $55 billion or something, massive amounts. And then it fell by 90% in the next 4 years or something. And the response, of course, and Ogden newspaper should be credited in this way, the response in a lot of chains was to do what? Slash newsrooms, cut newsrooms, cut newsrooms, cut newsrooms, cut newsrooms, cut newsrooms. And we'll somehow stay alive as a printing press carrying ads that nobody wants anymore. And they got rid of content instead of getting rid of printing or changing the perspective. And they let go the one thing that they had, which was info, the news, right? They let that go. They were thinking about Craigslist, which was eating their lunch. But instead of saying, okay, what do we have that Craigslist doesn't? They said, how do we compete with something that's free? And you can't. So the tens of thousands of newsroom jobs that were lost across the country over the coming decade after that, what content replaced that content? Low quality, hyper-partisan, nationalized crapola, right? There are not that many stories that are national stories. There are not that many issues that are really national issues. The presidency is the only office that is elected by all of the country, and the issues that afflict West Virginians are very different than the issues that afflict people who live in Oregon, which are very different than New Mexico, which are very different than Maine. Our advantages are many in this country, but one of them is that we live in a republic of states where people can be as weird as they want, anywhere they want, and I can do it however, I can live wherever I want and leave us alone. It works. But the national press doesn't have enough stories of real national interest. Have you ever noticed when there's a blizzard in New York City, the whole 2/3 of the country that has not experienced a blizzard, there's a guy in Scottsdale, Arizona, it's like day 3 of blizzard coverage. He's like, I don't know, guys, I'm not really seeing it. So the our urgent effort now is to rebuild local news. Our urgent effort is to raise up a generation of hoppy kerchevals around the country of people who care about it, want to be deeply invested in it, want to be present in it, and that care about this. That this isn't just, don't be like me, don't like just skip off of Oakland and then go up to Washington. People who invest and spend the time and spend the effort to make local news great again, let's do that, because then we can, C.S. Lewis, I talk in the book about C.S. Lewis and men without chests. So in classical thinking, your head, this is where your reason lives. Your gut, that's your gut. Your chest is supposed to order your passions, right? Your chest is the part that is supposed to say, this is more important than that. What's the motto for the God, family, country, right? That is teaching Marines. This is what you care about. This is the most important one. That's the next important. So that's what the chest is supposed to do. Our passions are disordered because we are spending too much time talking about national stuff and not enough time talking about local news. We should be spending more of our effort and energy talking about the news that's around us in our town, in our county, in our district, in our state, than we are on the national news. So, hoppy kercheval.
You're very kind.
It's very true.
Okay, let's take one or two more questions. It's about 8:30. One or two more. Go ahead.
You did touch a little bit on this, but first of all, I look forward to reading your book. And in general, the thesis of your book is that there is that rage and hyper-partisanship is profitable for news. I also see signs where there's a lot of just redundancy across. Even if it's not rage, there's a lot of redundancy. Are there other forces besides the profitability that is driving some of the problems in journalism?
So there's a saying in TV which is talk is cheap. It's really expensive? Hiring high quality reporters to go do good work in the field. Really expensive, and it's really time consuming. And if you want to do good journalism, you know what most of the time your reporters are going to say if you say, Bill, give me a great investigative story. And they'll be like, yeah, I'll get right on that, boss. Because 8 out of 10 are going to be nothing, right? And you have to pay them to not file stories if you want great investigative journalism. That's just the truth. If you want to hold power accountable and you want to do all that stuff, that is really expensive. And if you do it, readers and viewers may not like it, right? If you find the wrong thing, they may be like, hey, wait a minute, I didn't know we were calling those on our own team here. So it is expensive and risky. The Fox News Decision Desk was the best in the business, and I was very proud to be part of it. And we beat the competition every cycle, but it turns out that in the end, that wasn't really a product that Fox News viewers wanted. It wasn't really, they weren't really into that. And I guess maybe I'll put it this way. The cheapest thing that you can do is put 2 fat heads in a studio and have them yak at each other, right? And in that case, so I think when you say redundancy, the word that comes to mind for me is narrative. And so much of our coverage falls into narrative coverage. That this is about, there was a New York Daily News story that was about, I don't know whether anybody saw this, but I swear this is actually true. A country club in Stafford, Virginia, they were talking about their menu and what they were doing on the weekend of September 11th, and they had 9/11 themed menu items and cocktails.
Oh.
So not super, right? Not super. And so the New York Daily News is the New York Daily News. They hate Donald Trump. So it's the story about this, which is, let's face it, a funny story. It's a funny story. When people are that dumb, it's a funny story. So, and of course, the country club is very sorry, and it was a mistake, blah, 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 blah. And then it says, this is not the first time people have made mistakes with 9/11 mentions, da-da-da-da, and brought up Donald Trump's 2014 tweet about what did he say, even to the losers and the haters. I wish everyone a blessed 9/11, even the losers and the haters. Now, why did that make it in there? Because the narrative that the New York Daily News needs to sell every day is that the bad orange man is bad and he is coming back, and you have to think about the bad orange man all of the time. And if the New York Post wrote it, what would they say? They would say it would be the opposite story. That did you see that Joe Biden, he didn't salute correctly, or people are outraged. So narrative takes over, and so you get these repetitive, redundant stories. There was a guy who was the executive editor of the New York Times named Hal Rand, and among many notable things from his era, R.I.P. Jason Blair, was the concept of flood the zone. Boy, what a terrible idea. And flood the zone is, do you remember when that Malaysian airplane went missing? And CNN was like, that's it, baby. We are covering this. And because they figured it would be found, and it didn't, and so on and so forth. But flood the zone is the concept of, if you find a story that people are interested in, shove everything in on that story and only talk about that one thing. It's lazy, and it's counterproductive, and we shouldn't do that. Now I'm bummed out.
Let's take one more question, sir. And Chris may stick around for questions after. Yes, sir.
So can you share your thoughts on, I've heard you talk about tribes. So you got the far left tribe, you got the far right tribe. What are your thoughts on getting those two tribes to talk to each other?
Well, I think all the things that we've talked about here, and it's much harder to hate a person you know than to hate a stranger, right? Hating a stranger is super easy. Back to fundamental attribution error. Well, you know how they are. That's how they are. If somebody in Alabama reads a story about something that happens in Oregon, they'll be like, you know how they are out there. And in Oregon, when they read a story in Alabama, they're like, well, you know how they are down there. So strangers are easy to hate. It's hard to hate a person who you know. And that's why the local news is important, one of the reasons that local news is important. But the other thing is, most of the politically engaged people in this country are people of goodwill. Most of them really, really are. Most of them really love the country. Most of them really want good things to happen. Most of them really care. Most of them want the best things. Very few people are in the either cynical or deluded or crazy fringes, right? Most people are people of goodwill. What will be necessary, I've had way too many opportunities in the past several years to quote Abraham Lincoln's speech to the Young Men's Lyceum in Springfield, Illinois, which was more than 20 years before the Civil War, when he said that we will either endure for all time as a nation of free men or die by suicide. And the latter option is still very much available to us, right? This can go away. I talked about, a family. A country is like a family in the sense that it only exists and is real because we say it is. We assent to this, and we say this is why we're here. What is necessary to keep the republic and prevent the death by suicide that Lincoln was talking about is that people of goodwill who are left and right are going to have to come together in support of basic Americanism and basic decency, in defense of the Constitution, in defense of free speech, in defense of hard citizenship, because this is hard citizenship. But what will be necessary is a coalition of people of goodwill, Democrats and Republicans, liberals and conservatives, because otherwise we know what will happen. So to close with a West Virginianism, the best way to get good at something fast is to play for more than you can afford to lose. And I think Americans are aware now of that this could go away. And I think that is what will drive us, people of goodwill, people like you here tonight, to want to be better news consumers, to want to be better citizens, to want to love their neighbor a little bit more, and do that stuff to try to hold on to the country. So I'm enormously grateful for you guys tonight. Thank you for being here.
Conversation. I have to admit that I found my tribe here this evening, and I get sucked into this conversation. I have about 1 million questions of my own that I would love to sit for another 5 hours and chat through. But thanks to all of you for being a part of this evening. And again, thank you, Chris, and thank you, Hoppy. I want to mention that Chris's book, Broken News: Why the Media Rage Machine Divides America and How to Fight Back, is available in bookstores and on Amazon. And you can also email ajohnson@bncollege.com to receive a 10% discount and free shipping. There's some information, I think, up on the screen, as well as out on business cards at the book signing table. So please take advantage of that. It's a good read. And I would reiterate what Chris said, that local news is where it's at, man. Local news is where it's at, and I know that the university and the Reed College of Media is actively working to help promote and lift up and support local journalism in communities across West Virginia and our region, and it is vitally important because those are the issues and the people and the events closest to where you live, and that's where it all begins, and that's where it all started for each one of us. And I hope that it continues to inspire young people to be the eyes and ears for those who do not have the access that we are fortunate enough and privileged enough as journalists to have, which is the ultimate responsibility, as Chris mentioned. So thanks to all of you for joining us this evening. I hope you have a safe and wonderful evening, and we hope to see you back here again soon at West Virginia University as we host more events. Have a great night.